The Middle East is in a mess. The United States, together with Israel, is attacking Iran. Iran, of course, is retaliating, and not just against the United States and Israel, but also against other countries in the region, like Kuwait, like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia. They're attacking oil infrastructure, also water purification plants, things like that. Why this is happening is a very good question. Iran is accused of sponsoring terrorism, and also they're accused of attempting to procure nuclear weapons. Now, to discuss all this, I spoke to an expert on anti-terrorism, a world-renowned expert on anti-terrorism, Professor Rohan Gunaratne. I sincerely hope this interview is as engrossing to you as it was for me. So, Professor, welcome to the exchange. To start things off, I'd like to ask you what sort of reasons might there be behind the US and Israeli attacks or aggression or sudden attacks and aggression against Israel, because no one saw this coming. And apparently this has been in the making for quite some time. What are your thoughts on that?
On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel conducted operations to dismantle the Iranian regime. And in the opening strike, they killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Their main intention is to replace the current regime with a democratic regime in Iran. The reason they want to do it is because of three principal reasons. One is that Iran was developing a functional nuclear weapon, and Iran had enriched uranium beyond what is needed for a civilian nuclear program. Iran was building a military nuclear program under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In fact, it was chaired by a Sri Lankan called Ambassador Jayantha Dhanapala. So Iran trained a group called Hashta Shabi, or the Popular Mobilization Force, which is 67 Shia militias in Iraq, the Lebanese Hezbollah, which is the group that introduced suicide terrorism to the world. In '83, they bombed the French paratrooper headquarters and the US Marine barracks, killing 300 French and American troops. Also, Iran supported Ansarullah of the Houthi movement in Yemen that has attacked shipping. And Iran also sponsored so many other terrorist groups in Pakistan, Afghanistan, elsewhere in the world. But Iran also planned and conducted terrorist attacks around the world. They planned to kill President Trump twice. They commissioned a man called Farhad Shakiri, an Afghan national, to kill Trump. And it is the same Farhad Shakiri who worked with a Maldivian called Bilal to conduct the attack in Arugam Bay and to attack the Israeli consulate in Colombo. And of course, IRGC also successfully conducted 2 attacks in Australia. They attacked the synagogue and also attacked a Jewish restaurant. And of course, the Australians shut down the Iranian embassy and expelled the ambassador and closed down their own mission in Tehran. So the third reason is Iran's steadfast support of proxies. These are the main reasons the US and Israel intervened, and these are the main reasons many other governments will support the coalition to ensure there is regime change in Iran. Sooner or later it will happen.
Now, you said the US wants to bring about a more democratic regime in Iran by sort of toppling this sort of extremist or Islamist regime. But then again, it is the US's doing which led events to come to this point. In the 1950s, they overthrew by a CIA coup, a democratically elected government, and then brought in the Shah. And then, of course, in the aftermath, in the uprising, they supported the Islamists, in fact, brokered the release, or in fact, the repatriation of Khomeini from Iraq to Iran. And here we are. So this regime, in a way, was brought to power by the US themselves.
Dhammika Ekanayake, you are a very good anchor because you have done your research and your homework. What I would like to say is that the United States was firmly backing the Shah when the Iranian Revolution took place. But previously, of course, as you mentioned, the United States intervened in Iran, and that didn't do too well for the existing government. So today the US, having monitored the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the main military intelligence security and the administrative arm of the Iranian regime, they know that this regime is a dangerous one, producing nuclear capabilities, missile capabilities, and also terrorist proxies. They want to now change this regime. And it is also because of the attempts to kill Trump and to conduct so many attacks from Argentina to US targets and French targets in Lebanon to targets in Australia, and of course the plot that was disrupted in Sri Lanka, many other attacks in India, in Thailand. So I think that there is an effort today, a concerted effort on the part of the Americans working with Israel and many other countries, because the Western nations are working together. They share intelligence on all Iranian operations. For instance, just day before yesterday, Kuwait disrupted another proxy of IRGC in Iran, planning a major terrorist attack. Just a few days before that, Bahrain disrupted it. So I think that it is so important for there to be a proper government in Iran that doesn't engage in this kind of missile proliferation, and also terrorism.
I understand the Professor, but at the end of the day, one can't actually escape the fact that US has meddled quite badly in that region, especially in Iran. And now the very people they backed at some stage is now the enemy. But anyway, moving on. Looking at the US involvement, it feels like, from the outside at least, that all the neighbors of Israel are not really powerful. They can't stand up on their own. The Egypts and the Iraqs and now the Irans and there's other surrounding countries. It feels like there's an element of the tail wagging the dog, as in the US is doing the bidding of Israel. And there are other international commentators which argue that there is a greater plan in play here, which is more economic than military or territory oriented. So how do you read that? Not read that necessarily. How do you interpret that? Is there any truth to that, or do you see some elements of this in this case?
To respond to your first question, Iran is in the Levant and the Gulf region. And if you look at the Levant and the Gulf, which is called West Asia or the Middle East, we have seen that Iran has attacked all the countries in the Middle East. They have fired missiles or drones into all these countries. None of these countries want the current Ayatollah regime to be there. Of course, they are afraid to tell it openly, but they have communicated this privately to the Americans, and they themselves have issued several warnings now against Iran. My view is that these countries will eventually form a global coalition to replace the regime in Iran. It will come to that. But to go back to your key message, is the United States doing this for Israel? Israel is representing largely US interests in the Middle East. No one can doubt it. In fact, that is why the Ayatollahs have always said that the big Satan is the United States and the small Satan or the mini Satan is Israel. So that is why the new leader of Iran, that is Mujtaba Khamenei, he has told very openly, we want the US to withdraw from the Gulf countries, meaning from the Middle East. They don't want any US bases. Second is they want US and Israel to pay reparations, meaning for the damage and the destruction that has been conducted. So certainly Iran will be the dominant power if there was no Israel, if there was no US presence in the Gulf or in the Levant. So entire Middle Eastern security is today guaranteed by the United States. If you take the Middle East, there are a number of what you call middle powers: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt. These are the middle powers. But these powers do not have the capabilities to go to war with Iran. They have the capabilities to defend themselves. Especially now they have built the defense capabilities to protect themselves from missile and drone attacks. But Iran is far ahead even of the middle powers in the Middle East to fight anyone, because it is relying on asymmetric warfare, what you call hybrid warfare or irregular warfare, where they are using information and influence operations. They are using terrorist operations. They are using proxies, or what is called front, cover, and sympathetic organizations to advance their aims militarily, politically, and diplomatically. So it will take a few more years for the other countries in the Middle East to build the capacities and the capabilities to confront a power like Iran.
We accept the fact that the US is trying to move for a regime. They're trying to oust this regime and bring about a new democratic government. Fine. But we've seen similar scenarios or devastating after effects in similar operations in the past: Libya, Iraq, and so forth. I mean, it's almost like letting a genie out of the bottle. You can never predict where a country will end up. The likes of Libya, Iraq, they're in disarray after US intervention, military intervention. So what makes you think, despite good intentions, or let's just, for the argument's sake, say US intentions are good, to actually bring about a democratic regime, that things would actually turn out better in comparison to what happened in previous instances with other countries?
The American intervention and the European interventions have not been very successful. As you rightly said, in Afghanistan, the Taliban came to power. In Iraq, the Iranian influence deepened. In Libya, it is still a conflict zone after the Europeans and the Americans intervened. In fact, much of the weapons and the capabilities in Libya has now moved from the North African region, that is Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt. It has moved to, the threat of terrorism has moved to the Sahel, that is Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Chad, Nigeria. So I think that intervening and trying to change regimes is a very long process, and it may not happen the way you plan for it. So as you mentioned, Iran may become stable after regime change, or it will not. It can be also a conflict zone. So it is a risk. The operation that has been mounted is a risk. It doesn't give the guarantee that Iran will become a stable state. But certainly, I can tell you based on my own research, having visited Iran as a part of a diplomatic delegation, I can share with you that Iran has 850,000 members of IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that is the main entity, the main political, administrative, diplomatic, and security and intelligence and defense entity that the US and Israel is fighting. It's a very powerful entity. It has officers around the world. It has capabilities around the world. IRGC was built soon after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, which is a parallel force to the Iranian Army, Navy, Air Force, and intelligence service. So IRGC has its own intelligence, its own Army, Navy, and Air Force. And it's deeply entrenched in the Iranian society, in the Iranian government. So it's very difficult to replace IRGC. So I believe that it will require the best national security minds of the world working together to restore stability and security in Iran. It's something that will take many years.
Now, there are certain lessons to be learned from the likes of Iraq and Syria, where the major powers were, let's just say, weakened, and then other actors moved in to fill a vacuum. Do you fear something like that may happen in Iran as well?
US intervened in Afghanistan after 9/11 because Al-Qaeda used Afghanistan as a training base, and also the main 9/11 attack was launched from Afghanistan by Osama bin Laden. But in the case of Iraq, the Americans intervened in Iraq based on a theory that there was weapons of mass destruction. But eventually, the International Atomic Energy Agency revealed that there was no WMD. Saddam had no WMD program at the time of intervention. So there was no support in Iraq for the Western forces. And of course, Americans withdrew from Iraq, keeping a very small footprint, and had to return back to Iraq, especially when ISIS emerged, the Islamic State emerged. And of course, the threat spread to Syria. And all these conflicts, that is in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Syria, all these interventions led to the loss of about 1 million Syrian, Iraqi, and Afghan nationals. So it's a huge loss of human loss, and also maybe about $3 trillion American dollars were lost as a result of these wars. So certainly the Iran campaign, the campaign to regime change in Tehran, will also be a very costly one. But beyond reasonable doubt, based on the reporting by the International Atomic Energy Agency and also reporting by many government agencies, it is possible that Iran was moving in that direction. And we have seen evidence since the 28th of February that Iran had built a huge missile and drone arsenal that is not really needed for them to protect themselves. And of course, Steve Witkoff, US envoy, mentioned during his indirect talks with Iran through the Oman mediators that the Iranians themselves said that they have sufficient enriched uranium to build 11 nuclear devices. And I think the Omanis have not disputed it. So I believe that if there was no intervention during this time, we would have seen Iran, which is nuclear armed, nuclear capable, and precipitating in the Middle East an arms race.
You mentioned ISIS there rather briefly, and it made me recall a conversation I had with an eminent individual several days ago. basically one of the things, one of the observations that he gave was like, how curious it is that ISIS never really, or at least there is no major incident where it has been documented that ISIS actually attacked an Israeli establishment. I've never done any research into this. Is this true?
No, ISIS has mounted attacks against Israel, but they couldn't inflict significant damage. And even if you look at today, although most of the missiles target Israel, Israel has been able to protect itself very well compared to the number of missiles and drones. So Israel is a country that has the best national security minds, and they are able, very small but very capable, to protect itself. But I must share with you that there is a conspiracy theory that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, is an agent of the United States. I want to tell you that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed by the United States. And in fact, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed a few months after the Americans said that ISIS have been defeated in Baghuz in February, March of 2019. And of course, immediately after that, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's representative in Sri Lanka, that is Zahran, mounted a devastating terrorist attack in Sri Lanka. But since then, every day we have seen ISIS have been attacking Christian and non-Muslim targets and Muslim targets in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. So I think that if one looks at the best counterterrorism database in the world, which is open source, which is by the University of Maryland, the START Center, they maintain an open source database. We have seen that ISIS initially killed a very large number of Muslims, but they also killed a very large number of Western troops, and they continue to kill people every day, even today. I have seen the reports in Africa. Africa has become the main epicenter for ISIS operations. They attack churches, they attack villages, towns, and cities. So they have not given up their fight. So I think that it is so important for us to go to those credible sources and study who is doing what.
You mentioned conspiracy theories. Now I have one, which is basically the suggestion that Israel, through the use of Mossad, actually bombed their own establishments, synagogues and so forth, in surrounding countries in a bid to get the Jewish population to flow into Israel. Is that true? Is it verified?
I have seen
limited to conspiracy?
I have seen some unsubstantiated allegations that Israel is attacking the countries in the Middle East to turn them against Iran. But I can tell you that today, the most advanced governments have the capability to follow what you call the electron. If Israel attacked Oman, Qatar, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, these countries of the Middle East, certainly those governments will be able to trace from where the projectile came. Today the technology is such, the satellites above the Middle East, both government satellites and commercial satellites, like Planet, will be able to exactly tell from where those weapon systems fired either a drone or a missile. So I think that the biggest threat today is fake news or misinformation and disinformation. And I think that governments will be able to exactly trace the trajectory of those weapons.
But
Israel is
actually
not behind the attacks that have been mounted in the Middle East, in the countries that I mentioned.
Professor, I understand that. So that's in modern day. What I meant was that there is this claim that Israel, through the use of Mossad, and had actually perpetrated certain bombings at certain Jewish establishments, including in Iran and various other countries in that Middle Eastern region, to drive the Jewish population into Israel. Now, this is well before Trump came about. So, is there any truth to that claim?
I have not seen any evidence that Israel attacked Jewish establishments to get the Jews to return to Israel. But I have seen that people who do not understand what is happening has made such allegations without any evidence. But I can also share with you that many Jews are returning back to Israel. They start to return to Israel because they feel that to be a Jew, they must be in Israel. In fact, it's a part of what you call prophecy. Even the Christian Jews, they travel to Israel because of biblical prophecy. But I have not seen any evidence that show that Israel conducted attacks to get Jews to return back to Israel, because Jews themselves are very motivated to support Israel. In fact, as you know, there's a very big Jewish community in India, and Mrs. Gandhi always informed Sri Lanka that she's having the Israeli consulate in Mumbai or Bombay then because of the Jewish community in India. And those Jews have migrated in thousands back to Israel to settle there. And of course, there was an attack in the Chabad house in India, in Bombay, but that was perpetrated by Lashkar-e-Toiba. So I think that it is important for us to identify through investigation, if not a domestic investigation, international investigation, who did what. There are no credible evidence I have seen of Israel doing operations to get the Jews to return back to Israel. But you are right, in one sense, there's a very big exodus of Jews now returning from the diaspora and from the migrant communities back to Israel. But they do it largely because of prophecy and because of their religion and their faith.
Now, coming back to the war situation, Professor, now Israel is a mountainous country. I mentioned at the outset how US had similar interventions in Afghanistan and bombed the living daylights out of Afghanistani mountains and achieved precious little. So in that context, can Israel be defeated, completely be defeated militarily? And I mean, what does a win look like for America and Israel at this stage, and what does a win look like for Iran? Because as far as President Donald Trump is concerned, it's very sketchy as to what he perceives as a win. There is no publicized goal which defines a victory. So what do you think a victory is for these three parties?
A victory for the United States and Israel will be that the regime has changed. Ayatollahs are no longer in power and there's a democratic government in Iran. But this is something very difficult to achieve in the short term, because as I said, IRGC is entrenched in both government and in the population. And IRGC has developed a strategy called the Mosaic strategy. Mosaic strategy is decentralization. So they are in all the different provinces of Iran. So even if there is what is called decapitation of the leadership, decimation of the rank and the file of IRGC, still IRGC will survive in the jungles, in the mountains, in the villages, and in the towns and in the cities, both above ground and in the underground. And it is very much driven by its ideology. The Ayatollahs believe that they are the guardians of the Muslims. So that spirit has gone down to the IRGC rank and file. So that is why I said it's a very difficult fight, because for 47 years they have been in power. But of course, because IRGC slaughtered between 8,000 to 32,000 Iranian protesters, at least 60 to 70% of the Iranian population don't like the IRGC. They don't like the mullahs led by the Ayatollah. So that is why I said regime change is possible, but it will take time. But certainly if there's a vote today, the Ayatollah regime will be defeated because of the brutality of the Iranian regime in using force against the civilian population. With regard to Israel, Israel is an invincible power. It's the regional power in the Middle East today. And it's in fact a global power in terms of its military capabilities, its security and intelligence partnerships, and its economy, and its diplomatic capacities and capabilities. And today there's a new axis that is being created. The US, Israel, UAE, Somaliland, and so many other countries. And this axis will grow in strength, size, and influence in the coming months and coming years.
Regime change doesn't look like it's going to happen within the next 2 weeks at this stage. And the Ayatollah who is in power has seen his father killed, his family killed, and so forth. So this regime is not going to forgive and forget anytime soon. As long as this regime is in power, it will not forgive and forget. In fact, it would want revenge. That's speculation, but I think it's reasonable to assume that. So with that being the case, I certainly do not see a swift conclusion to this war within a couple of weeks. Because given what has happened, it is in US's best interest, it is in Israel's best interest not to leave a regime which is vengeful and seeking revenge. So how long do you think the entire world will have to sort of go through this? How long do you think we would have to suffer because of this?
You are a very good anchor because you have also made a projection, and it is your own projection, Dhammika Ekanayake. And I agree with you that if you leave a wounded lion, that lion will be a bigger threat. And Mujtaba Khamenei's father has been killed, mother has been killed, wife has been killed, siblings have been killed, and children have been killed. So naturally, if you look at his speech, and I have published an article with his full speech, and in that I argued that he is not for negotiation, he is not for reconciliation, he is not for mediation, he is not ready for diplomacy, he is for war. So I believe that the Americans and the Israelis and other Western countries and other Gulf countries who want this Iranian regime to change, they also know this. So So that is why I said that this war will be a protracted war. Certainly the intensity of fighting will diminish, but the endurance, the capacity for this regime to endure will be very significant. But sooner or later, the Iranian regime's capacity to replenish its missile and its drone capabilities will diminish. It may use sometimes some chemical and biological and radiological capabilities, but if they do that, of course, the international response will be very strong against Iran, and those people who engaged in that activity, they will be tried in an international court. So I want to share with you that there's a very small risk of using those special weapons as the last resort. But if that happens, the international community will go very hard on Iran. It is in Iran's long-term interests that the current regime remnants enter into a phase of negotiation.
Professor, what do you mean exactly when you say special weapons?
We have seen that the Iranians have developed a huge capability for using kamikaze drones. They have used also marine vehicles that are not manned, that will go and strike vessels. It has also armed, trained, financed, and directed so many terrorist capabilities. It has also developed some biological, chemical, and radiological weapons. And if those weapons are used, certainly it will damage the region very significantly. But again, it will produce an overwhelming response from the United States, from Israel, and from other countries to protect themselves. So at this point, it is so important for Iran, the Iranian leaders, the political, military, diplomatic, security, and intelligence leaders to understand that if such weapons are used, they will be held accountable and for the crimes that they have committed.
Anyway, so you mentioned these kamikaze drones. I mean, they're using these drones right now, as I understand, because, I mean, the US is fighting the Iraqis with millions of dollars worth of fighter jets and drones and so forth. Whereas I saw a report where it said the Iranians are using, $10,000 to $30,000 drones, these kamikaze drones, and they're targeting certain, essential infrastructure and water purification plants and food storage facilities and so forth. Whereas US and Israelis are targeting military installations from their side. So this is asymmetric warfare. So this is why I asked at the beginning, I mean, how does one determine a victor here? I mean, like you said, regime change as far as Israel and USA is concerned. As far as Iran is concerned at this stage, holding on to the regime, as you said, the intensity of the battles may die down, but keeping this, or actually coming out of this battle with the regime in place would also be a victory for Iranians. So how does the US and the Israeli reconcile that? And also the fact Trump is being very confusing, US President Donald Trump, because at one moment he says Iranians don't have a navy, they don't have an air force, they've been obliterated, and we won. And then goes ahead and asks for help from the European partners to ensure navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. It's very confusing. So why would you say, okay, the Iranians don't have XYZ, we've already won, and then go ask for help?
Iran has a very significant army, navy, air force, intelligence organization, and other capabilities such as cyber. So what we have seen is that Iran will continue to fight until those capabilities are decimated. And once those conventional capabilities are decimated, they are likely to use their unconventional capabilities. As you rightly mentioned, the correct word, it is an asymmetric conflict because Iran is fighting two powers that have extraordinary weapon capabilities. So Iran will use low-cost, low-tech weapon systems to survive and sustain and prolong the fight. There will be no clear winner in the short term. So simply a military victory is not within sight. It will require very significant investment, not only in the military effort, but also subsequently very significant diplomatic, political, economic capabilities to restore security and stability of Iran.
The United States has crippled Iran with numerous sanctions, as they have done with Russia. Maybe Russia is managing to survive to a certain degree, whereas Iran has not been able to withstand the sanctions to the level Russians have been able to. So the objective of, as I understand, these sanctions is to attack the country's economy. But if you go further down the line, these sanctions or their trickle-down effects will be felt by the people. They will take to the streets and ultimately would rile up against the incumbent government, ushering in maybe a new one. So ultimately, a regime change is the objective of sanctions. Now, given US has done so for a number of countries, isn't US actually culpable in this case?
The United States has put Iran under sanctions for many years because Iran was developing a clandestine nuclear program. Iran was also supporting a number of terrorist proxies. But I want to tell you that simply by putting a country under sanctions, say even in the case of China or Russia, these countries have produced, their domestic production has increased very significantly. So Iran started to produce a lot of their weapons internally, and they built what is called a dark fleet or a shadow fleet to bring the precursors clandestinely to Iranian shores or through other countries to build capability. So sanctions have an impact, but it really didn't cripple Iran. It made the Iranian leadership even more determined to fight the West. And I think that sanctions are effective, but there must be more effort put to have a dialogue, to discuss these issues and resolve these issues through negotiation and through mediation. Because unless there is greater investment in that arena, there will be conflicts around the world. It will be too much for the world to bear. So I believe that national security academies in the world, defense universities in the world, think tanks in the world should produce not only experts in defense, national security and intelligence, but they should produce experts in peacemaking, in peace building, in negotiation, in mediation, in reconciliation. That should be the future of this world.
Professor, thank you very much for that. I think it's time to sort of draw our conversation to a close because we've taken quite a lot of time, at least the first part of our conversation. So thanks for that, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.